Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's GIC Talk. My name is Bradley Weiss. I'm a volunteer here at GIC, and I will be your host today. Before we begin, I would like to ask you to please turn off your cell phones or switch them to silent mode. Done? Okay, good. Today's speaker is Dr. David Weber, a political science professor at the University of Missouri in the United States. He holds an MA from the University of Pittsburgh, a PhD from Indiana University, and he has been in Gwangju previously to participate in Jeonnam National University's International Summer School in 2009 and 2012. And again this year, he just finished participating in the program again yesterday. And he's back in Gwangju and with us today to talk about one of the most discussed presidents in the history of the U.S., John F. Kennedy. Both the momentous events of his short 3-year presidency and the shocking details surrounding his assassination 50 years ago this November have made him a figure of historical fascination for even non-history buffs. Let's listen to what Professor Weber has to tell us about John F. Kennedy, but first, let's welcome our speaker with a big round of applause.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be in South Korea this summer. One of my concerns was being away from the USA because this is the 50th year of Kennedy's assassination, and there are new books coming out every month. I was looking at the English books out over in the GIC, and I found a book about Jackie and Jack Kennedy, and I think it shows that there was still interest in this topic. So one of my interest is why has Kennedy stayed so popular? And he only served as president for 3 years, from 1961 to 63. 50 years later, people still talk about it. As you probably know, he had 2 brothers who were also in politics. And one, Senator Edward Kennedy, passed away in 2009. And then his other brother, Robert Kennedy, was assassinated in 1968 as well. So his family was in politics very long. Senator Kennedy first became popular with a book that's very old. 50 years old? 60 years old almost. Profiles in Courage. And I've seen this in libraries in many countries. The first book that I read about President Kennedy was a Christmas present. When I was 12 years old, my parents gave me this book about John F. Kennedy. So that was the beginning of my interest when I was only 12. And you may have heard that President Clinton met Kennedy when he was in 1963. Do you know that story? So President Clinton was president from 1992 until 2000. But he had met Kennedy when he was still a boy in 1963. But he's not the only boy. Okay? Boone also met Kennedy when he was a boy. And this is in his biography, which some of you may have read. He was Secretary General of the UN. Yes? Do people know him? Boone? Yes? So in his biography, he discusses this. And so this is Kim Jong-un when he was 18. He met Kennedy when he was a boy. So I think Kennedy has influenced 3 boys. Me, Clinton and Ban Ki-moon. So two are famous. Well, one not so famous. I think one of the reasons that we still are the Kennedy has a legacy and is so much interest is when he was president. 1 month before he was assassinated, he was very popular, 58% in a Gallup poll, and now that would be very high. Obama is probably at 50%, and some of our other presidents were less than that. Historians do surveys and ask them who are the greatest presidents, and many studies say that he's about number 10, and I think President Obama is number 44. He's the 44th president. And, we've had other presidents, I'm sure you know, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Franklin Roosevelt, who are very famous too. So I think the competition for the top is very, very difficult. So the slogan, or the motto for Kennedy's presidency was the new frontier, and so I think this is one reason that he is so popular today, is that it was a time of great change in the U.S. So that was a good time for him with appointment. So it was a time of great change in science and space, and then in peace and war. So the 60s were very controversial, very intense time in the U.S. Can you run this? Can you make this work? So this is a brand. I bought this book the week before I came to Korea in June, and I have a clip. Fareed Zakaria. Do you know him? He's on CNN. He interviewed the author. Can you make it? It's only about 1 minute.
Days after this was part of a strategy. It was not just an isolated event. It was incredibly well thought, brilliant.
You say that 50 years ago, Kennedy delivered what you describe as the most important speeches any American president has ever delivered.
I think it is the most important speech of the modern presidency. It was a commencement address at American University. It was 50 years ago just now, and it said there's a way to make peace with the Soviet Union. It was so compelling that Nikita Khrushchev, Kennedy's counterpart, heard the speech, first stopped the jamming of it so the Soviet people could hear the speech, had it printed in full in Pravda and Izvestia, and sent to the U.S. envoy of the time, Avro Harriman, called him in and said, "That is the finest speech by an American president since FDR. I want to make peace with that man." 7 weeks later, the partial nuclear test ban treaty. And what's striking is that the Ich bin ein Berliner speech, which was just a few days after this, was part of the strategy. It was not just an isolated event. It was incredibly well thought. Well thought, brilliantly led strategy by President Kennedy to pull the U.S. and the Soviet Union back from the brink of nuclear annihilation, which, of course, was the brink at the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy and Khrushchev felt after having that near-death experience, not only that we all have had in the world, but that they had as the two leaders, felt something different has to be done. Kennedy took incredible risks and pulled it off.
So that was Jeffrey Sachs. He's the author of this new book on Kennedy, and it's about a speech 50 years ago. So I wanted to give several reasons for Kennedy's legacy. My specialty and my interest is public policy. Gong Gong Jung check? Yes? Okay. But I think there's historical reasons too, which I want to show first. So one of them was this timing. President Kennedy was fortunate to be elected in beginning of the television age. So and he's considered to be the first television president in the U.S. He received a lot of attention just because of the invention and the use of television. Then we had a period called Camelot. It was a famous musical, and Kennedy, because of his youth, because of his wife Jackie, and because of his family, it was a very glamorous time, and it was like a Hollywood movie. Third is his family is so big. These are his nieces and nephews, and many of them have gone into politics too, so they have been able to promote his legacy. Then I think the tragedy of his assassination probably keeps us focused on his life and his history. So I think a tragedy is bad, but it also caused us to focus on him more. His personality, he was very energetic, very young, and very challenging. So one of my favorite quotes is this. So he had what we call a can-do spirit. He wasn't afraid to do new things. So I like this quote: "We go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard." So I used to use this to encourage my sons to study hard in school and to take algebra 2 and trigonometry and calculus. I used to tell them, take calculus, not because it's easy, but because it is hard. And they would look at me, they would not understand the irony of that quote. And then he's famous for this quote. Have you heard this? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It was very famous in the U.S. But what I'm mostly interested in is these public policy reasons. And I think these are the same issues that are current today. And I'm going to focus on 3 of them, really. But the one that Mr. Sachs was talking about was nuclear arms reduction. That it was, for those of us born in the early 1950s, during the Korean War, in the 60s, we were concerned about nuclear disaster with the Soviet Union. So this was very important that the Soviets and the U.S. began to negotiate. Civil rights, he was one of the first, he was the first president to really support changes in civil rights. And I have a quote. Peace Corps, I think, is very important to Korea. And then space, that he announced that we would try to land an astronaut on the moon, which we did by the end of this. But he also made mistakes, which we still talk about in the U.S. 2 of them involved the Caribbean, Cuba, and which is about 90 miles from Florida, and it involved the Soviet Union putting missiles in Cuba. And Kennedy and Khrushchev had personal correspondence concerning the Soviet missiles. And I think historians think that Kennedy learned a lot from that period, that he didn't make good decisions, and that he learned to be more critical of his advisors and of the military. One topic we still discuss in the U.S. is would Kennedy have gotten us involved in Vietnam from 1963 to 1973. As you know, the U.S. our military was very heavily involved in Vietnam, and we still debate that. So I want to focus on 3 speeches that he gave in 1963. So all 50 years ago this year. 50 years ago this summer, really. And I think these were the most important speeches of his administration. The first one is the peace speech that this new book is about. I will just show you, I quoted from the speech, but it's too long. I will just show you a couple points. So this is what's called the peace speech at American University in June 1963. So just these first couple sentences. What kind of peace do I mean, and what kind of peace do we seek? Okay. Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons control. Okay, but a peace for everybody and for all times. I'm afraid, I don't think this would have been popular to say in the U.S. in the 1990s, 2000, even some politicians in America would not agree with this now. So it was very bold in looking back. Go on. So part of his speech, he said that Americans should learn more about the Soviet Union, and that although we disagree with them, that they aren't all bad, that they have had successes in science and art and other fields, so that we shouldn't just dismiss all of the Soviet Union because we disagree with them about democracy and communism. That's it then. But we should still, praise them for their many achievements in science and space, economics, industrial growth, culture, and acts of courage. So this would not be popular to say. President Obama might say this publicly. He probably thinks this, but I don't think he would say it. Then the second one is civil rights. And you may have been seen in the news in the last couple weeks. There's been a very controversial trial in Florida. Trayvon Martin. Have you read about? Some people read about that. It involves civil rights as well. So in his speech, he says that we are confronted primarily with a moral issue, and that we cannot delay. 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, but yet those years are not fully free. So he said that we need to make civil rights of mostly African Americans much more of a priority. And then third, he gave a speech. This is one of my specialties. I have written academic articles about this topic. He was one of the first presidents to encourage us to be more concerned about the environment, about conserving water, and trees, and parks. And in September of 1963, he did a 5-day trip to, he visited many states to encourage them to become more concerned about how they use resources. So I think these three issues, peace, civil rights, and conservation, he was a leader for our time. If you back up for a second minute. This is the link to the Kennedy Library. So if you, jfklibrary.org, there's all kinds of photographs and speeches about Kennedy. The Kennedy Library, I think, is considered one of the best presidential libraries. So I started thinking about giving this presentation back in June when I was still in America. And when I came to Gwangju, I thought, well, what is President Kennedy's legacy in Korea? And I thought of three things. One is the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps, there are over 2,000 Americans who served in the Peace Corps, and some of them have become very famous. And you may know one. I will show you here in a minute. But I am a political scientist, so I thought, well, what evidence can I have? Is there any proof that Kennedy's legacy is stronger, is bigger than other American presidents? So I thought, well, how would I examine that issue? So I thought, well, the president after him was Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, who was president longer than he was. So I had a very good teaching assistant, Chonong, this summer. So with her help, I was able to look and see was evidence of Kennedy's legacy in Korea. And there were 6 books with Kennedy in the title that I was able to find. But 160 books with Kennedy as a subject, but none about Johnson. So that was evidence that, yes, he does have a legacy. Then I did a neighbor search, right? I must do this now in 2013. And neighbor is the Google of Korea, right? Or maybe not Google, but what? Yahoo, I guess. Over 1,000 items I was able to find for Kennedy, and only 280 for Johnson. So I thought, well, maybe he is. And then this is Google, which is all over the globe. So it's not just Korea. But there's many more about Kennedy than about Johnson. So then someone, I forget who told me. Someone told me this. I didn't remember. But Kathleen Stevenson was the ambassador. Mm-hmm. Yes, and she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea in 75 to 77. She's about my age, I think. In the U.S., we often ask, will there be another Kennedy? And part of that is because we are frustrated with the political system. When President Bush was president, we didn't like him. Now President Obama is president, we don't like him. I don't know who the president will be next time, but I'm sure we won't like him or her either. Right? We've become much more cynical, I think, critical. So my answer is, I don't think there will be another Kennedy. And I don't think it's because of him. I think it's because of us, because of society. But the world has changed much since 1960. And Washington, D.C. is so much larger than it used to be. There are more media sources, right, with the internet, with Facebook, blogs. But I think Kennedy was a product of his time. So I tend to agree with historians even more than political scientists. I don't know that Kennedy had a very attractive personality, and he was young, and he was the first television president. But I think that's the 1960s was probably a good time to be president, and we won't go back to that time. So I don't think we will have anything like that again. Thank you.
Now begins the question and answer portion of today's GIC Talk. If you didn't receive a piece of paper when you came in, please raise your hand, and one of our volunteers or staff will come and give you a piece of paper so you can write the question on, and the questions will be brought to me so I can address them to the speaker. Please refrain from raising your hand or asking the speaker questions directly. So, Professor Weber, a little bit more about you personally. So, in the intro, I stated that you got your PhD in Indiana and your MA in Pittsburgh. Where are you from originally in the U.S.?
Close to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a steel city. It made a lot like Costco steel, similar to that.
And I stated that you've been in Korea for the Cheonnam National University Summer School in 2009, 2012, and this year. Are those the only 3 times that you've been in Korea?
First time I was in Korea was 1991, but just for a week.
Okay. And what led you to be interested in Korea?
Good question. I think I was born in 1951. So I always heard that I was born during the Korean War. My father was called back to the army. He stayed in the U.S. But that phrase always stuck with me, Korean War. Then because of Vietnam, many U.S. troops were in Seoul, stationed there for a short time. So I heard about, in the 60s when I was in high school, I know more about South Korea. But the most important reason is that at the University of Missouri, I think I have 12 students in Korea, 12 PhDs. One is at Chosun University, who I had dinner with the other night. So I have followed many, not all of them, but 6 of these students. And I will hopefully see the other 6. And they've been very good to me. So I enjoy them. I've learned a lot from them, and they have been very welcoming. So, which is why I came in 1991. And so I've always had a nice time here. And in 2009, I learned about the international summer school program that Dr. Shin initiated, and I was accepted, and I enjoyed it very much. So I think I will come back again. I hope.
Okay, you mentioned that not only John Kennedy, but his brothers were active in politics, and now many of his nephews and nieces. A lot of this stems back from his father Joe becoming very wealthy in the middle of the last century. However, there have been some people in recent times that have criticized the way that Joe Kennedy came about his wealth. Can you talk about those criticisms briefly?
His father was a friend of Franklin Roosevelt and had, I think he was on the Securities and Exchange Commission. So back during before World War II, and that's where he made millions of. He took his money out of the stock market just in time. so many in 1929, I guess. So many friends and many Americans lost their wealth in the stock market crash, but he did not. And one question is, how did he know? Did he have inside information? So there's no doubt that his family has benefited by his wealth. And he went to good schools because of that. When they turned 21, they received $1 million. And even nowadays, $1 million would be okay to get.
Speaking more about his upbringing and who he was as a person, can you maybe compare the breakthrough of John F. Kennedy being an Irish Catholic being elected for the first time? Can you compare that to Obama being the first African American president?
My family is Irish Catholic, and I was in 4th grade, and I went to a Catholic school, and I know it was very important. I mean, it was very special that he was a candidate for president in 1960. And I'm aware of all that, but I try not to, be too influenced by it. But I'm sure that's one reason I was interested in him as a boy. But, and it was, looking back, it's hard to believe that it was such a big deal. But it almost, Obama being elected probably is bigger. And I think if we have a woman elected, it's probably bigger. But maybe it's very similar.
Okay. So you mentioned a little bit about the lessons that Kennedy learned during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now he's been given a lot of praise for pulling back from the brink. But can you talk a little bit about how much blame he deserves for participating in the brinksmanship in the first place?
Yes. There have been many books written on this, and I was in a bookstore, a high school library yesterday, and I found a book on the shelf, 13 Days, which is the name of a famous book about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's been made into movies. I think he's criticized for being confused about what advisors to listen to, and I think he had controversial advice, and I think he was too trusting of the military. And then secondly, now there is evidence that he had private correspondence with Khrushchev, and I think he didn't tell the truth to Khrushchev, apparently, about whether we would, whether we had spy planes over the Soviet Union. And we said we did not, and I shot one down, so yes, we did. So intelligence, he wasn't as honest about it as he should have been.
Okay. You mentioned that many people like to speculate whether the U.S. would have been drawn into the conflict in Vietnam if Kennedy was still alive. Someone is interested to hear whether you think that Kennedy subscribed to the domino theory, the idea that if one state falls to communism, then another, then another.
Looking back, from 2013, it's hard for most Americans to believe that we believe in the domino theory. But and now Vietnam is such a friend of the U.S., right? And the economy is doing so well. It's very hard to look back and to see that so many of our leaders thought that we could contain communism by being engaged in Southeast Asia. But my opinion, I don't know what would have happened. I hope that he would have learned. But like his peace speech in 1963, to me, it seems that he was learning, that he was changing. There's a brand new book that I learned yesterday. It's called J.F. Kennedy's Last 100 Days. I found it on the internet just yesterday, so I've not read it. But I think it argues that he learned enough, especially in his speech, that he would not. I don't know.
Another question for an opinion of yours. So you talk about many of Kennedy's successes. In your opinion, what was his biggest success?
To me, civil rights has to be his biggest success. And we passed the Civil Rights Act after he was assassinated. It was signed January 2 of 1964. And I'm sure it would not have been passed if he had not been assassinated. And we, since Abraham Lincoln, since the Civil War, the U.S. has fought and been in great disagreement about civil rights. So I think that has to be number one.
Okay, a few more questions. You mentioned the Peace Corps and their activities in Korea. Are you aware of any, can you cite any specific accomplishments of the Peace Corps here in Korea?
I did, no.
Okay.
No. I think I emailed Dr. Shin and other people asking them if there were any buildings or memorials that I could use as evidence. But I would appreciate it if you know of any. But several people told me the Peace Corps and
okay. So two more questions. So you mentioned that the Civil Rights Bill, the passage of the Civil Rights Bill was facilitated by the assassination of JFK and how that affected public opinion. You mentioned that he had a 58% approval rating, and that's really high when he was assassinated. However, can you talk about the impact that his assassination has had on his legacy? How much more has he been sort of posthumously canonized?
Yeah. Well, his influence on civil rights was also when he was alive. Like the speech was in June, his famous civil rights speech. And then the famous speech with Martin Luther King, the March on Washington, was August of 1963. And that's the event that I would be sad that I'm not in the U.S. because I probably would have gone to Washington to see the celebration of the 50th year anniversary. And he also approved the use of U.S. troops to see that integration was enforced in southern states. And that took a lot of courage. I mean, that was unpopular.
Okay, this will be our last question. If you didn't have your question answered, we apologize. We have limited time for the question and answer portion. But if there's a question that you have that's left unanswered, please feel free to address the speaker after the talk. So, Professor Weber, one of the things that's generated the most questions and the most discussion in general about JFK is his assassination.
Yes.
So everyone wants to hear, what is your theory surrounding the events of his death?
I don't know. I don't. And I'm surprised that I don't know. Because this was, in college I read books about it. I've seen movies about it. In the U.S., they say that his brother, Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, thought that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. That's what they say. But it could be propaganda. I don't know. I'm just amazed that we don't know. In 1977, there was a House committee that had another hearing, and they published lots of books. I looked at some of those, and their conclusion was that Lee Harvey Oswald, one gun person, acted alone. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, I guess it's one of those mysteries that will remain a mystery in history. So let's thank Professor Wright for answering. So, Professor Weber, thank you so much for your interesting talk. As I mentioned in the introduction, there has been a lot of discussion about Kennedy over the years, but I think everyone in the audience will go home today with at least some new bit of information or perhaps perspective. But now, GIC Director Dr. Shin Young-woo would like to offer you a small token of appreciation.
In fact, Kennedy was a myth when we were young.
Oh, yes.
But now the new generation does not have that much high respect on his leadership. But, so, in that regard, your topic today would be even more attractive to some of the older generation, not the younger generation. But still, he is worth to read about, to talk about continuously for our future. One of the answers to your question, whether Koreans really appreciate the Peace Corps in Korea, I think the Peace Corps in Korea is not lucky. At that time, personal view, they gave tremendous influence. But throughout 1980s and 1990s, anti-Americanism was quite big in Korea. So their contribution was not fully appreciated by Korean people at that time and in the future as well. So they are not lucky enough in Korea. But still, when they were here, they gave quite tremendous influence to the younger generation. Bit younger than us.
Yes.
So thank you again. Thank you again to revive the memory of John F. Kennedy to all of us. Hope you can come back again and to share your ideas to us. I want to mention one more thing about Professor Weber. His age group in the US belongs to the most progressive segment of the society. Don't you agree?
Is it really?
And then in Korea, the most progressive segment of age groups is now in their... Which age group do you think in Korea, the most progressive? In their now 40s. In their 40s. And then in the US, in their 60s.
Yes.
Because you experienced civil rights movement and then anti-establishment movement. So Korean people in their 40s, they experienced anti-dictatorship.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then democratization movement.
Yes.
So
So it's about 20 years difference.
that's right. 20
Yes,
years.
I think it's a good point.
Then Hollywood movies in the US were the best in their 80s. In my perception, Korean movies were the best in their 2000s. So about 20 years ago. Some more addition to your talk.
Oh, I appreciate it.
So, a letter of appreciation to Dr. David Weber. We'd like to thank you for your support to Kwangju citizens. As a guest speaker to GIC Talk on July 20th, Mr. Topic, President John F. Kennedy's legacy after 50 years. Hope we can talk about it again. Thank you very much.
I do have just a small contribution to the building fund. I know that you have a flea market still to continue to raise money. So I bought a majority T-shirt which you can sell at the flea market. So you should not keep this because I know you have many majority T-shirts already.
They have tried.
Oh no, not
No?
no.
No?
It's me. should have bought my ISS t-shirt. Okay,
Good. Not the hat.
Oh, no. Thank you.
Okay, the topic of next week's talk will be Life in Korea, a Filipino scientist's perspective, presented by speaker Hannah Ebro, a native of the Philippines. Please note that this will be the last talk before GIC Talk goes on a 1-month hiatus during August to allow for the busyness that will be accompanying the GIC's move to its new home. GIC Talk will return in September. So one final thing, you received a survey about GIC Talk as you entered today. Please take a few minutes to fill out and return the survey to help us improve GIC Talk to better suit your needs. Thank you all for taking the time to come today, and we hope to see you next week.